welcome to the third episode of I'm a Creep Conversations. Today I'm going to be talking to Claire Kidd, who is a painter and recent graduate from the master's course at Glasgow School of Art. When I say this was the easiest video I've had to edit, I'm not joking. It's taken me like literally a few hours because I couldn't cut out anything. The conversation just flowed really well. She's a great conversationalist. She talks beautifully about her work. And we discussed everything from like her travels to projects she's been working on during the pandemic, her degree show, and also there's an exciting project that she might be releasing soon that's mentioned at the end of the video, so if you're interested then just watch the full thing. Thanks so much for watching. We've reached the midpoint now, 3 more artists to go, and a huge thank you to the artists who've already been. It's been such a great experience, and yeah, so without further ado, or more of me talking, enjoy the episode. Hi Claire.
Hello.
Do you want to start off by like talking a little bit about yourself and just introducing your practice and everything?
Yeah, I just finished my MLit at Glasgow School of Art, and I'm now taking the venture into full-time art making, or at least for a little while, and moving into a new studio soon. My practice is mostly fine art, oil painting, quite traditional in terms of my materials and that kind of thing, but with a magical realist twist, slightly surreal kind of narrative paintings, I would say, is what I've been mostly working on for the last two and a bit years, and I'm quite comfortable in that realm. We'll see where it goes in the future.
Your work relies on much of the places you've travelled to and the connections you've made while there. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your experiences and the greatest impacts they've had on you?
Oof. Yeah.
Going straight in.
Yeah, it's a good question. I did the Carnegie Vocational Scholarship when I was at Gray's between my 3rd and 4th year, and I think that's what kind of tipped off this idea that travel was going to be quite important to me. I guess because I'm making magical realist work, a lot of it centers around this idea of the surreal and putting yourself into situations that feel like disorientating and unnatural or like different. And so travel kind of immediately did that, especially when I was taking myself out of Europe. There's like language and sensory information that's new to you, and you can't communicate the way that you're used to communicating. So I think all of those things kind of work together to make it a very disorientating experience. So yeah, when I went to Morocco, that started to become really apparent that would be useful to this kind of magical realist twist that I have in these figurative paintings. And then in December recently went to Pakistan, to Lahore, which was very disorientating, completely different to anywhere I've been before. Mm-hmm. And certainly the experiences during that travel have leaked their way into the paintings, mostly in the titling of the paintings. Things like, we were there as a large group, and things that people in the group would get up to that you wouldn't get up to at home. Like we were a friend of ours' house, and he had a large display of like weaponry, that kind of thing that,
oh my God,
you know, usually I would have no interest for, really, personally, like weapons and the tie to violence. It just doesn't really do it for me. But the boys decided to try out a taser and tased one of the guys just to find out how much it hurt. And I just remember watching this and being like, oh my God, why? Like, I would have stepped in if this was at home, but because I'm somewhere else, I'm just kind of like, it's almost in a glass box. You just watch things happen that you're like, oh, I should probably like be a mom here and like tell the children to stop. So I guess definitely situations develop in a way that you don't step in when you usually would.
Is it a case of like you don't go on a trip and then automatically do work for like about that one specific experience, or is it like you'll take random points from different travels that you've gone on as a whole?
Yeah. I guess so far I've kind of worked mostly from each place, and then do like a set number of things from that particular place. And then like the works I've done from Pakistan have been very much kind of like their own encapsulated thing. They're not like leaking too much into Morocco or Spain, etc. I think specifically just because each place has different ways of disorientating you, so they're not necessarily compatible. What I would say is the imagery is definitely a mash of different experiences during that one trip.
Yeah.
And then the title might have nothing to do with the imagery. You know, like one of them is called "Sometimes I Forget We Paved Venice," and that has nothing to do with the image that you're looking at, but it comes from a diary that was written at the same time as the travel. So kind of becomes this, again, slightly disorientating collage of memories and experiences.
I think, like, let's talk like a little bit more about like the titles of your work and the titles of your like exhibitions, because I've noticed you tend to do like they always sound really poetic. So I'm just interested to know, is like all of that just from like the diaries that you keep, or is it just a collection of words that you collect?
Yeah, sometimes my own work and my own writing. I certainly don't claim to be a writer at all. I'm definitely not trained in any way with kind of spoken word or written word. And sometimes it's from poetry or from songs that I find that are kind of appropriate to the painting somehow. But for the most part, all of the ones from Pakistan, at least, were all written from either my own diary or from like snippets of conversations. That was something I started doing when I got back from Pakistan to my studio at Glasgow, pre-pandemic, post-Pakistan, somewhere in that small window of time where I was actually in the studio. I started to try and write down all the important memories and the important things that happened when I was in Lahore, because it became like so many things had happened, and I was finding it hard to process how to then make artwork about it. So by writing them down first and then highlighting like, that's an interesting sentence, or like, why would I word it that way? Why do I remember it that way? Like I just have diaries and then like highlighted sections, and that kind of slowly developed into how I title paintings.
That's like quite an interesting thing, because I find that either like in my own practice, like I write a lot, but that's just like research, like a lot of it's like social stuff, so I have to like write down like dates of things, and like I will sometimes use that as titling. But when you're almost creating two separate, not final outcomes, but two separate creative outlets.
It's not really something that I'd thought to do, but we had some good guest tutorials throughout my master's, and they'd kind of like suggested that there was something in the writing that I was doing. I definitely did it the same way that you were suggesting you did it, where it was just trying to make sense of something in my head, or it was to document something, you know, places, times, that kind of thing. And I kind of just put those on the wall as research, and then they kind of came back into the practice a bit more as I went on. So I think it started to become clear when I was looking at my work as amalgamations of realities. The reality of what happened in Pakistan can't be accurately captured in just one photograph, because it's a very limited, like, literally by framing, it's very much a limited version of what was happening, and it can't be completely encapsulated in what I'm writing, and it can't be completely encapsulated in a drawing that I did at the time. So all of these things are just small fragments of like one larger reality or one larger experience. So I think bringing the written work back into the paintings through titles was one way of kind of putting together a few fragments, so I'm not just kind of displaying just the painting from a photograph, or, you know, just ways of disorientating and ways of, you know, gathering together these fragments.
Do you think, like, this completely just like off the top, well, not off the top of my head question, but just
Mhm.
from the conversation, do you think you ever would like do like solely like a written piece, or do
I
you
guess
like
I've
the
kind of dipped my
yeah
I've dipped my toe.
yeah
Dipped my toe a little bit. I have a short poem I wrote in the virtual exhibition that I have up as a kind of replacement for my degree show, which is called Like Me Scooped Out. I have one short piece of writing from then. I think I would probably display poetry. I think I quite like that I'm not trained in it, which means it comes a bit more naturally and a bit more freely, and
you're
I'm
not grounded
with
by like
no
the
rules.
things that you feel like you should be doing.
Exactly, yeah. I think the lack of feeling of like structure or rules.
Yeah.
I know those exist in poetry, but I'm deliberately not learning them. And the poems I write are probably to an academic in poetry rubbish, but to my practice quite useful. And hold a bit of a naivety to them, which I enjoy. So yeah, maybe I would do some in the future. Keep it on a back burner just in case.
The door is open.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Just like talking a little bit more about now and recent history, recent what's happening now, I guess. Has COVID and the extended quarantine had an impact on the way you've created? Like, I know you had, did you like move studios or something? You moved to like a small room and then moved out again?
Yeah, I so when the pandemic really hit its peak and the university closed, we were given less than 24 hours, or roughly 24 hours notice to get whatever we want out of the studio and just go.
Oh my God.
GSA gave us no notice, no nothing. They were just like, get your stuff, get out. And at that point, or like a week or two after that, I chose to move to Glen Shiel, which is kind of like West Coast near Kyle of Loch Alsh. It's like a really remote area.
Oh, wow.
We were helping a friend doing some key work. The business he runs is like a saline farming business, so it's an eco-friendly business, farming crops with like salt water, so that there's no like irrigation systems and stuff. There's less waste. So we went to go help with that, and I used what are they called? Abattoir, the room where they hang up dead deer.
Oh, wow.
After hunting. I used
God.
that as a studio, because obviously there was no deer being hunted at the time, which I'm very glad for, because I'm very kind of like anti-hunting kind of thing. But the place we were staying, that was the only room where the walls were like wiped clean and the floor was wiped clean. So I was using that as a studio for a little while. Which was really creepy.
As a crossover, I never really saw happening that an art studio and an abattoir would require the same wipe clean ability.
There you go. And they had all these like hooks for hanging animals from, and I ended up like at some point I was like hanging my painting on there to have a look at it, and I was just like, oh, this is too weird. And so I was only in there briefly, and I'm sure that would probably have influenced a lot of people's practice. It was a really interesting environment. I might paint from that at some point, but at the time I was just so focused on doing what I was doing. So then after Glen Shiel, I moved back to Aberdeen, and I was using my old bedroom in my parents' house as a studio, and that's where I've been up until now, that little room, which was great. I feel really lucky that I had that, because I think a lot of people finishing up their masters got kicked out their studio space, and they lived in student halls, and they just had like, you know, an IKEA desk, and that's the extent of their workspace. And that must have been really hard. I found it really hard even just in that little room, but at least I had it, you know?
It's a really, like, I don't know the word for it, like, 'cause any word I choose is going to have either a positive or negative connotation. It's kind of just neutral, but it's a weird thing just thinking all of these artists being displaced out of the environment that they've just spent a whole year, or even like a good like 4 years in my case, getting used to being in, and you're
Yeah.
just all of a sudden like, okay, you're not in there anymore. Bye.
I know. I think it's difficult to come at it from any perspective because obviously, like, to an extent, the institutions didn't have much option but
Yeah.
to do that. I do think most institutions could have done a better job than they did.
Yeah. Giving you a day is like intense.
Yeah, we've had a lot of problems with GSA this year, but I think lack of communication would probably be the key one.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, and not to let institutions off the hook at all, but I would say it's probably good for artists to get thrown out of the comfort sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, certainly there's things that happened in my practice this year that would have probably not, like, I became more independent in a way because of it. And I probably wouldn't have gained that independence under the wing of the institution. Whether that makes up for having to still pay fees and still, like, you know, that's a whole different conversation, but I am seeing a lot of people's work improve because of this kind of period of self-reflection, which is hopeful. Diving
more into your artist statement that you sent over, and just like, and I think it's the second paragraph, you start talking about like the other, and I know you watched the conversation I had with Caroline like prior to the last episode, and we briefly discussed how other forms of artwork out with Western society and a lot of like not artwork, just traditions and things, are always seen as less than. Your work reflects much on the shared experience of humanity. Has this like been a point of exploration in your travels, and also it just like a thing that you've looked at in your own work, or just something you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in my own work, there's a lot I need to be conscious of historically. Obviously, coming to look at like the idea of a relationship with people that are different from you. Historically, there's a huge amount of just kind of white person goes traveling, writing about their experiences, and you know, movements like Orientalism, which kind of also tie into magical realism. Magical realism has really deep roots in post-colonialist kind of narratives, and it's really, really important that I acknowledge that, and that, you know, to an extent, my work has to come with a bit of a like disclaimer that I am only able to share the experience that I have in that place. And it's really important that people know that that's a very limited experience. I looked a little bit at things like the tourist gaze, and, you know, my experience of Pakistan largely was, you know, being driven around place to place, not seeing the extent of some of the areas, you know, depravity and or wealth. You know, like, I have a very limited view of what it is actually like to live there. Also, because we were a large group, it did cause a bit of like a sensationalized thing of, you know, suddenly there's like 35 European looking Westerners, and it was a bit like everyone was very confused about who we were and why we were there. And so we became a little bit self-important maybe when we were there, because people thought we were more important than we were. And so that perspective completely skews what it's like to actually live there. You know, I was definitely not getting an authentic experience of being from Pakistan. And I think largely art from those areas is still marginalized in Western society. There's a bit of a requirement for people to like acclimatize almost. Certainly with work that's highly decorative, which is very, very common in, you know, both Morocco and Pakistan that I visited. Like, artwork there is extremely highly decorative. I think especially because they're both like largely Islamic countries, and depicting the face and depicting the body is kind of frowned upon a little bit. It's seen as like egotistical. or I'm pretty naive on the whole topic, but generally, like, to depict the face of somebody is not a done thing, and instead you show your appreciation through these decorative patterns and scripture, words, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's really popular, and in the West it's really frowned upon to have highly decorative work. It's seen as craft. It's seen as kind of like too kitschy. Certainly, like, trends of minimalism in Western art is, far cries from artwork from the Middle East or from, Pakistan, India, Morocco. And I think they're completely recognized art forms, but, they're not being given the platform they should be getting given. Over here, there's an expectation that you acclimatize to these kind of white cube galleries. How does it look under bright white light in a white room with a white floor?
Yeah,
I'm not really here for that. I'd rather exhibit in a bunch more interesting places than a white cube.
Have you found that, like, even in your own work, I would describe, like, I'm just looking at your print over here that I've got, I would describe it as also, like, highly, like, detailed. Has that been something that you found, like, hard to stick to doing that? Because I'm assuming that your work has always been very much the same, like, following the same path, or have you ever been tempted to, like, branch out into like like
more abstracted,
like splashing paint on the canvas and be like, woo?
Yeah, I think I had a little bit of a flirtation with the abstract or, like, slightly more formalist art style when I was in third year, but it never really quite stuck. I would say I tend to, like, ebb and flow away from it. Like, I do find if I get too strict with it and too close to reality, it loses something. So I definitely think there's a sense of, like, reining it in so it looks more realistic, and then once I find I'm like, okay, this is getting kind of replicatory, what am I doing that's elevating this above just a photograph, then I have to, like, branch out again. So I definitely work from image sources a lot, and that's what allows me to get, like, a certain level of detail to it, because I'm working not from a model but from photographs. I do sometimes still work from a model, but obviously that's, like, a little bit different, and having multiple different sources allows me to work in a slightly less realistic manner all the time. If I'm working from a piece of writing or a poem where I have to fill in the blanks of how that actually would look, then it's going to be looser. It's going to be less detailed, because it's impossible for me to realistically imagine a tree or a face, or and so working from different sources allows me to get that balance of realistic and then impossible and just probably a little bit wrong. So
when you have, like, less, like, source material, do you find it a lot more, like, maybe not fun, but, like, more exciting, like, when you say you just have your own words and you're like, how can I construct a composition from this?
Yeah, I think having the range is important. So when I'm just from my own words, I do find that I'm like, oh my god, this is stiflingly difficult to just wing it from my own words, especially if it's someone else's words.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to work from the words of someone else, I'm like, it's like trying to speak a language with a different tongue. Like, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Especially, I don't know, this might be off topic, but I find that when I read poetry that's written by someone that's English, I find it really hard to, like, read it out in my accent and expect it to sound right. Whereas, like, when I read Scottish poetry, it makes sense in my tongue and then somehow makes more sense when I paint. So it's like a relatability when it's someone else's words. I struggle with that, and that's why I think it's important to have it there as a struggle, and then also have source materials that are maybe more comfortable and that you're, like, more used to, and that those kind of two ends of the spectrum is where I work best, when I have some source imagery, but I also have some wild card, either like a poem or a song or a completely different piece of source imagery that has nothing to do with this one. Like, balance of order and chaos.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Do you go back to, like, the same source material sometimes? Like, will you, like, keep something and be like, I'm going to keep this for later?
I think I've only done it once or twice. I have, like, a folder of photographs on my laptop that I'm always like, this is an amazing image and I have to use it for something. And I tend to find once it goes in that folder, it dies. I never get around to using them. But they're you know, like, they always come into the mix when I'm looking for what's the next thing to paint. I'll always open up the folder and look at them. And so I guess subconsciously, like, probably they do have a place in all of the paintings I've been doing, but not directly. They're never directly, like, used. I really like Peter Doig, and I find that he does that, replicates the same image over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But sometimes they look so different that you wouldn't even believe it's the same, you know, the same photograph he's working from. I think there's one of a man, like, carrying it's like a dead bird along the beach in Trinidad, and it's in so many paintings, and almost none of those paintings include the dead bird. It's just the guy walking across the beach. And when I watched the documentary where he shows the photograph, I was like, oh god, I'd never have clocked it, you know. I think that's quite fascinating. I'd like to say I'll come back to some of them. I work in series usually, so once I cling to something, I tend to stick with it for a while.
What I, like, admire most about your work is just the surreality. I don't think that's a word, but I've written it down.
Surreality, yeah.
There is you know what I meant.
Yeah.
Of your composition, and at times colour palette, particularly in your piece, I think we broke something that I've included on the posters. Is it a lengthy process in choosing your colour palette, or does it come as almost intuition?
I guess mixed. Sometimes it takes me a really long time, especially if I'm working from a photograph and I don't want to replicate the colours that are in the photograph. It takes me a long time to decide what they should be, because obviously, like, my brain's quite tied to the colours that I can actually see in front of me, and if I'm going to change that, it's like a bit of a fight mentally for you to detach from what this thing is. I just had a massive fixation with pink for a while before I made I Think We Broke Something, and so I just immediately was like, pink, it's going to be pink, everything's pink. And there was tons of pink when we were in Pakistan, like, more so than I'm used to seeing. Scotland is a fairly green and grey place, and so, like, just the amount of vivid colour when we were there was really stifling and just, like, overwhelming, and I loved it. And pink, for some reason, is the thing that kind of just, like, jumped out most. Prior to making that one, I had made, like, a series of smaller paintings of the same kind of feet and table situations that were called table manners, and I did them all tonally. They were all mostly browns in, like, a reddish colour, and I wanted to keep that tonal aspect where it was going to be mostly 2 to 3 colours, with one of those colours being the fixation. So obviously when I transferred it onto a larger scale and into oil paints, pink just kind of, like, pushed its way to the front, and then the other colours were just chosen to be complementary and chosen to reflect some of the patterns on the rugs and stuff from the source imagery that I'd taken over dinners. That was our dinner situation, because there was like 35 of us. We would just put rugs and bedspreads out on the floor and all step around the plates to pick up whatever it is we were, like, serving ourselves. And the first night, everything got broken and we were terrible at it, and people kept standing in food or standing on a fork or dropping a glass, which is why I Think We Broke Something happened. But by the third or fourth day, we were like clockwork, in and out, nobody broke anything. And so those paintings are a little bit about this idea of, like, community, and also how we adapt to each other, how we adapt to unreal situations.
It's such a intense shade of pink that it would almost seem impossible to make anything, like, remotely beautiful from it, but you did it. That's the amazing thing.
I I think I was completely blind to how pink it was at the time. I didn't even really like think about it, and then when I took it out of the studio, when I had to move out the studio, I suddenly was like, Jesus Christ! Like, I was like, was it always like this? Like, was it always this pink? But yeah, I enjoy it for what it is. It's definitely like incredibly vivid, but then that's how I remember Pakistan being, so
it's a true reflection on your time there, which I suppose,
at least like through my oh god, sounds like a pun, but through the rose tinted glasses, if you will, of like how I kind of remember it.
Congratulations on your recent degree show. Which I haven't said yet. Titled "Like Me, Scooped Out." From your master's course. Do you want to talk a little more in depth about the collection of works and the reasoning behind the name?
So the collection, I would say, is kind of split down the middle. The first half being stuff from Pakistan, which is what I had been working on between maybe December and like May. Obviously, like with COVID, it kind of like leaked into later on in the year as well. And the second half being work from Glen Shiel and things that happened during the pandemic, and just me trying to like suss out where my place was in the world during that very confusing time. Like Me, Scooped Out really only happened at the very end, just as I was starting to put that show together. I made a cast of my dungarees that I wear in the studio every day, and I basically been using the dungarees as a kind of personification of myself. And so when I cast them, and I cast them so that it looked like my legs were in them, I kind of had this relationship of looking at it and being like, God, it's me, but without any of me. And it's like the paint on the legs is like a built-up of paint of me cleaning my brushes on my legs for like a year and a half to 2 years. And so it has this progression of all of my paintings are on those dungarees in some way, and my poetry is written on the back of the dungarees, and it's all of these elements of me but without me. So Like Me, Scooped Out kind of came to be this title for the whole year. And I guess any painting could be like, the actual paintings themselves can always be seen that way, you know, like you can look at a painting that's done by an artist and it's part of them without them. So I think that's just like an accurate description of how I was relating to my work at the time.
It's funny how you say that you're not a poet, and yet that is incredibly poetic.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a little part of me just reads a lot of poetry and like it seeps in somewhat, but it's more that like I have poetic thoughts, but I don't necessarily articulate them in a way that I would class as poetry. But yeah, certainly like I had quite an intense personal connection when I saw the dungarees without me in them.
As a result of COVID, you've become really fastidious in your involvement of online exhibitions, such as your degree show, Aberdeen Art Society Coming Home exhibition, and grad curate. That's a really difficult word to say.
I've done that so many times where I'm like, this is a brilliant like play on words, but incredibly difficult to actually say.
It looks good written down, but saying it, really difficult. Would an online exhibition ever have been something you would have considered prior to this? And have you enjoyed the experiences overall?
I don't think I'd necessarily thought about it that much. I did consider making kind of an online gallery of sorts because I wanted to make an exhibition of artwork from 3 of the people that I was in Pakistan with, and one of those people is a photographer called Yulia, and she is from Russia but living in Thailand, so it's going to become really difficult to get any kind of prints of photography of hers. And then because the pandemic happened, I kind of like backbenched that. I don't think I even reached out to her to like ask her about it yet, so she might find out about my imaginary exhibition that I've made up that was going to happen through this. But yeah, I thought about potentially online as a way of doing that. I am useless at technology, so I think the concept terrified me. Have a My other half is an engineer and does a lot of software coding, so luckily I've had him around for kind of helping me out with certain aspects of it. And most importantly, I found the website that I've been using to make my like me scooped out. It's called Kunstmatrix. You just pay a subscription and it gives you like a series of different galleries that you can choose with and it has this one holds 60 pieces of artwork, this one holds 20, this one holds however many. So it just became, for me, not an option to not do it. GSA's version of our degree show was really like a WordPress website. It's just a WordPress page, and I just didn't think that was good enough for the amount of work that students were putting in. It's not good enough to just offer a slideshow. So for me, it was a way of kind of taking the responsibility back into my own hands of like, okay, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it. And I'm glad I did. I think that the virtual space does a whole lot more for me as an artist than that slideshow ever did. So I've found it good. I've also found it slightly frustrating. Just in learning it, but again, it's a good skill to now have, that I feel like if I ever want to just make an online one where the funding doesn't have to be a problem, and if somebody wants to make a painting that's like 18 feet long, I can now do that in a virtual space. I have no way of doing that in a real space. So pros and cons. I definitely want to see my work up in a physical space as soon as possible, because it looks vastly different. But given the circumstances of COVID, I think that virtual spaces are coming on leaps and bounds, and that's good for people that are living remotely or don't have the budget,
Definitely. Before lockdown, you had the opportunity to host a solo exhibition in March back in Aberdeen. By the morning, I will grow. I will have grown back. Sorry, reading my own writing. By the morning.
Okay. That one's from a daughter song.
I thought I recognised it. I did think I recognised it.
It's from the song Amsterdam, I believe. And just kind of has this slight. It's very much like a coming of age kind of a song of going from being a teenager into exploring adult things in the adult world, and it seemed appropriate to this idea of like coming back to Aberdeen after.
Well, that's where my question was going. Like, was it like a full circle moment where it'd been almost a year since you left, since you graduated grades, and then coming back? Was it?
Yeah.
Did it feel very like strange, or?
I think perhaps it was like some of my artwork from my undergraduate also focused on this theme a little bit. And it wasn't necessarily the move from Glasgow and then back to Aberdeen, but rather just the move into the city centre and then back to the suburb that I'm actually from, and trying to view that suburb with the same kind of excitement that it had as a teenager or as a kid. Both good and bad, obviously, like trying to get back into that headspace of what it was like as a teenager, and when everything was heightened, the relationship you had with your parents or with your friends was like the most important thing in the world to you, and so if you fell out with someone, it was like the biggest thing ever. And the area around you was like, that was the limitations of where you could go. If you're 15 and you don't have a car and you don't have money to travel, you have to make use of the area around you. And walking around in the middle of the night because you have nothing there to do when you're a teenager and like you have all this going on. It was kind of an ode to all of that, like a bit of a I don't know how to describe it. I guess I was just trying to kind of encapsulate that time and how I felt then versus how I now look at that as an adult. And so trying to grow backwards, I guess, which was interesting, quite introspective, and it was nice to display it in Aberdeen. I did feel that there was kind of a responsibility to my own practice to make sure my first solo show was here.
So is it like an opportunity that you sparked off yourself, or were you approached before?
No, I was very lucky. I did a class with a business called Second Home, Second Home Aberdeen, who are brilliant, and they're really working tooth and nail to bring a good art space to Aberdeen. I've worked with them for the class, and then they helped set up that exhibition for me. It's a really unconventional business space for an exhibition. It's basically the boardroom or meeting room of a property company, and without Second Home having helped me implement it, there probably wouldn't have been an opening night. It would have just been a case of photographs and then uploading those. But luckily I had just the one opening night. It's not really open to the public to view because it is a professional space. But it was great for a first show. It just gave me a chance to like try my hand at curation in a fairly limited space of only a few paintings. It kind of felt like a wonderful training wheels experience, and I'd really like to do a second solo show sometime soon.
No, I've heard of them before, and like you said, it's really nice to see, especially in Aberdeen. Like something that feels like a business like that feels accessible and not like in other like art realms. It almost feels like there's a barrier between you and that. But in Aberdeen, it's a lot of focus on like making it a community, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Aberdeen has a huge divide between students that make up the largest proportion of creatives in Aberdeen. There's a huge number of creatives that leave Aberdeen once they've finished their graduation. There's a huge divide between that and between council-led initiatives, which tend to hit high markers like the gallery, the art gallery showing, wonderful artworks by, great artists, but there's no middle ground. You've just graduated, there's space for you. There's no community-led organization, here's a space for you. You have to really grow those opportunities yourself. Kirsty, that runs a Second Home, is doing like a really good job of trying to facilitate that and make that happen, and potentially even some studio spaces, which I'm looking forward to. That's still in the pipeline. So it's good to see something that's like grassroots and that's female led and that doesn't draw boundaries between craft and art. I think that is really important. There's no hierarchy in the creativity that they set to kind of try and bring people. I think that's very important.
I feel like I keep saying like moving on, or like what I want to talk about now. Also, I've got like such like a chat show alter ego. I'm just like, hi.
As long as you don't Jimmy Fallon laugh, I'll totally accept that.
No promises, but talking about like other ventures that you've like done recently, we'll just bringing into more discussion about the joint launch of yourself and a handful of other artists online zine Altered States at the beginning of August. How did that idea arise, and what are the plans for future installments?
I think that it came about quite naturally. We'd been in the studios really hoping to make a painting exhibition with all the other people that are part of the zine. Were also part of the master's course at GSA. So there was, before we even went into lockdown, hopes that we would make something physical in person. And then when lockdown happened, we started just having regular Zoom chats as friends, not even necessarily like as creative. And so throughout those chats, we were just like deeply frustrated with not having somewhere that we could like really express these ideas. And mostly discussing like how much our lives had been altered and how we were all feeling like weirdly spaced out, almost like slightly lethargic or like almost like drugged up sometimes. You know, you just wake up and you're like, time has no meaning to me. I can't do any of the things I'm used to doing. I feel like I'm living life through this kind of like underwater, foggy version of what it is. And it was an artist called Harriet that suggested this kind of altered states. She'd heard someone on the radio suggest that we were living in an altered state. And it just kind of like clicked that that's what this was, an altered state of reality. And we worked just making whatever we wanted to make to put into that zine for months, probably between like April and August, and it took forever, and sometimes it was really frustrating, but most of the time it was just like fun to play around.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like what I was saying before, it was a great opportunity for me to just try my hand at writing poetry and making slightly more digital illustration stuff that I wouldn't really submit to a fine art course, but I would submit to a zine because it's a space where I can do what I want.
Mm-hmm.
It was in a nice way a bit of a middle finger to the idea that GSA were not going to help us out, and so we were just like, we're doing our own publication, and we're not crediting you in any way, we're not discussing you, we're not submitting this for grading, we're just doing it, and it's nothing to do with it. So it was a really cathartic experience, I think, of just like getting anger into a document. Yes. I think there is some hope that we might make some in the future where it's like a submission-based opportunity where we would just call out for people to send them through, and we would have different themes. So, you know, the altered state might be then something to do with, like, it could be, you know, I guess like subculture or, you know, that kind of thing, travel, reactions to what's happening in the world at the moment. What is the newest altered state, you know? So yeah, I think we're all just in recovery from handing in our masters, so it might be a little bit of time, but yeah, it's definitely open to that in the future.
Again, just trying your hand at something new, bringing a positive to the whole experience is something that could never be a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. Finding a positive spin on it, you know, like it was a really good experience to make it, actually, despite like how long it took. I don't think it's ever taken me that long to do anything.
It was really good to like flick through though, because it is so like just seeing everyone's work, like I'd say you're all pretty varied, but it was just so aesthetically pleasing as well. Like, it's just...
Yeah, I can't even really take any credit for the collation of it. That was Harriet. Harriet was brilliant. I think she like took the lead role in designing this one, and then next one will be one of the others' opportunities to kind of take a lead role in designing it. But she did such a good job, especially like having the Instagram laid out the way it is. It just looks like really polished.
It does. It really does.
Yeah.
Lastly, last question to end on. Have you any upcoming projects that we have to look forward to coming?
Yeah. Well, like a few at least publications. So hopefully on Thursday. God, what's today's date? It's 25th. So it'll be Thursday, 27th, which is probably before this is going to have come out. But I've got an article in the Society magazine in Aberdeen, which is part of the Evening Express, and then hopefully I think I'm going to be featured in the Glasgow Herald at some time in the next week or two. They had an art critic do a review of some of the degree show work, and hopefully I'll be featured in that one as well. Other than that, it's mostly just now trying to set up again and send off the paintings that sold and make some new ones. I'm in the process of trying to work out how to get like a 1 meter 20 painting to Pakistan somehow.
Oh God.
But yeah, whether it's with Second Home or Edinburgh Printmaking Studios, I'll be hopefully moving into a new studio soon. I would also very much like to try and curate a show. like open submissions for people to send me artwork to that Kunstmatrix virtual exhibition and curate something myself. Very much an idea that's half baked at the moment, but once I get a bit more groundwork in on that, I'd really love to be the kind of behind the scenes figure rather than necessarily putting on a show of my own work just at the moment.
So would that be like promoted through your own Instagram? Just if anyone's interested.
I guess it's it could very much be like its own thing, its own Instagram, or I might try and see if I do it through Altered States. But either way, it would be an open call, preferably free if I can find a way to do that, and if not, it would probably be that the cost of it would just be to cover the cost of the subscription to the website. Or potentially even that and a little bit more, and be able to donate something. I want to keep this as accessible as possible, because obviously like a platform is being ripped out from a lot of people, especially recent graduates. So I think that the more places you can see someone's name, the more that name sticks in your head, you know. I found so many great artists just through the exhibitions that I've taken part in online, that I'm like, oh, you were in this one and in this one and in this one. You are prolific and I'm watching you. And that's important.
Yeah.
You know, like you just kind of do have to do that. Submit to everything that is a good idea. Like, don't, you know, question your ethics and morals to submit to anything, but submit to anything that is manageable and that's not charging you an extortionate like 30 quid to submit an artwork. Like, that needs binned, and you can ignore it, and you can submit to grassroots things. And if there's nothing for you to submit to, make something that you would like to submit to and do that. And I think that's kind of why I want to make a virtual show, because I was like, there's not enough, and there's not one that's right, and so I'm gonna make one. Like,
no, that was a sentiment that like in one of the like virtual shows that I was involved in, the creator of that, she put up a really nice like note from the curator, and she basically just said exactly what you said, and that it's kind of like she was very frustrated with how like it felt like a lot of places weren't for her. There wasn't the same opportunities because of lockdown, so it was like, okay, I'll just make my own thing then, and like make my own opportunities. And I think that's definitely something that's arisen like out of this. It's a really positive thing, like the amount of Instagram accounts, like solely on Instagram, because that's the only platform I'm really on, that have come out, which is like promoting other people and helping other people and like making the opportunities there. It's amazing, to be honest. So that sounds really exciting anyway.
I think as well it kind of like it works to balance out some of the traditional view that at your degree show you potentially get involved with a gallery that will offer to put you in a show. You know, it's all for you, you're in the show, but really it's like 30 quid to submit the work, and then we're going to take a 45% cut, maybe a 50% cut. And we're not going to tell you where your painting sold to, because then you can speak to that person directly, and then we don't get our cut. And it all felt really impersonal, you know. I did that for a show when I first graduated, exactly that situation. And it's the only painting that I've ever made that I don't know where it is now. And I don't like it.
Yeah.
Like, I understand showing in galleries is going to be that way. And I think, like, now that I have that understanding, I can be selective. But I think it's important that there's options. There's options for people to be like, no, I'm not doing that. I want to know who I sell to. If you're going to take a commission, I want it to be a reasonable commission. Like, I think working grassroots and having exhibitions made by young graduates for young graduates is quite important.
It definitely sounds really exciting. And I can't wait to see when it like comes to fruition.
I'll work on the idea a little bit before I start thrusting it out there, but
you're speaking it into existence now.
Yeah, I know now.
So-
I'm committed to it. I've said it out loud.
I won't be
God.
editing this bit out. It will remain in here.
Yeah, no. Good. Sometimes you need to push.
Anyway, thanks so much for talking to me. It's been a really nice conversation. And yeah, I'll leave all your stuff down below. Again,
in the down below. In the
well.
down below.